Joining me now is Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian. And Greg, I think a lot of people around the world in the West were looking for a strong speech. Did they get a strong enough speech?
Oh, Andrew, it was kind of vintage Biden. It was okay. Look, he's not the worst of them, you know. You could have had Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or something. But when you say he's not the worst of them, you've just about exhausted your superlatives. It was a pretty mediocre speech. The section on Ukraine was okay. He didn't give us any sense of how the future would unfold. He didn't say the Russians will face these sanctions while ever they have troops in Ukraine. And he didn't hold out any hope at all that the Ukrainians would ultimately prevail. He did express solidarity with the Ukrainians, and he foreshadowed, well, as you mentioned, he closed American airspace to Russian planes and said he would go after the oligarchs. So I'd give the speech a kind of a C+ overall, you know.
America will be okay, he said. He was trying to assuage fears over the nuclear threat, I guess. Do you think Americans will be reassured?
I thought the domestic part of the speech was pretty weak, to be honest. He spoke mainly about the legislation that he can't get through the Congress. And he and his party control the Senate and the House of Representatives at the moment. So instead of telling Americans what he's going to do, he was basically reminding them of his legislative failures. I think this line, America will be okay, was meant to be about COVID and the economy and inflation. He acknowledges that inflation is a problem, but doesn't acknowledge that you cause inflation by spending trillions and trillions and trillions of extra dollars. And his measures to reduce inflation, releasing 60 million barrels of oil, don't seem likely to have any effect at all, I would think. But having said all that, I think Biden will be quite happy if the Democrats get smashed in the midterm election. You know, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama both got absolutely smashed to bits in their first midterm elections. And as a result, they didn't have to worry about the left wing of their own party ever again. So Biden was elected as a centrist and has been governing as a way, way, way left of centre, tax and spend, identity politics kind of president. It was notable in this speech he hardly mentioned identity politics, and he was back to saying, we don't defund the police, we fund the police, and, you know, giving heart-wringing stories about how he went to police funerals and everything. Now, I think, frankly, really, it would benefit his presidency and probably benefit America if the Republicans take strong control of both houses of Congress, and he'll have an easier time responding to Republican legislative initiatives than he will trying to satisfy the sort of ultra-woke folks at the left of the Democratic Party. There was a complete disconnect between the sort of strongman Ukraine stuff and the domestic agenda. But I think he's accepted that he's heading for the Democrats are heading for a shellacking in the midterms.
He's just going to cop it. Well, it was interesting, the line in the sand again. I guess it's an obvious one, almost saying, Putin, you can have Ukraine, we'll help them out with weapons and the like. But if you go any further, the war's on with us. Do you think that'll be heated? And do you think it's a sound message?
I do. I think so. That's where he gets the C. That's where he gets the plus in the C+. Now, reiterating your commitment to defend NATO allies is pretty straightforward and pretty basic. It was sometimes beyond Donald Trump, I must say. But for a normal president, you know, Article 5 of NATO treaty says an attack on one is an attack on all. So he's been very clear. The United States will defend militarily every inch of NATO territory. Now, I used to be opposed to NATO expansion, but that means, I think I was wrong. I mean, what that means now is that Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia are probably safe and will never suffer the terrible fate of Ukraine. It's likely to get much worse in Ukraine over the next few days. My fear would be that 6 months down the track, you know, the voices saying, oh, well, we should accept reality, better to engage with the Russians than to isolate them, all this kind of stuff will come back into vogue, and we'll ultimately accept their conquest of Ukraine. The heroism of Zelensky and the Ukrainian people makes that less likely, and I think it's terribly important. Although Zelensky has been so brave to stay with his people, I think it's very important that the United States or someone get him out at the last minute so that he can continue to rally a free Ukraine after the Russians, murder a couple of 100,000 civilians and establish their imperial control in Kiev, which they're likely to raise half to the ground now because they haven't been able to get a cheap victory.
Yes, we're going to see a lot of bloodshed, that's for sure. And that government in exile, no doubt, will become an important decision if that can actually occur. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.